Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the last panel for the day of the World University Summit. My name is Sreejith SG. I am the moderator of this panel. Our panel today is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, the values of global citizenship and role of higher education institutions. In this panel, we have 5 distinguished speakers. Professor Dr. Kim Brooks, Provost and Vice President, Academic, Dalhousie University. Professor Dr. Lucas Grosman, Rector, University of San Andreas. Professor Dr. Samantha Kelley, Associate Director, Global Programs, Temple University. Professor Dr. James Mandigo, Acting President and Vice Chancellor, University of Fraser Valley. And Professor Dr. Funmi Olonisakin, who's yet to join us, Vice President, International Engagement and Service, King's College, London. This panel, as I've mentioned, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, values of global citizenship and role of higher education institutes. The Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which in Sanskrit, in English, it means the world is a family. In contemporary parlance, it can be understood as global family. In the Vedic scripture in which the expression finds place, it conceptualizes the idea of universality of humanity, united in the universality of pure consciousness. It signifies that beyond the artificial divisions of state, nationality, identity, ideology, politics, religion, and ethnicity, humanity is united in its universal mind. This high-end metaphysics, which tried to capture the unexplored possibilities of human existence, has revealed itself of late as a rising global consciousness, which is nothing but a desire to know the other. As if in other lies the mysteries of the self. There has been a tendency among the people to transcend their local and to find themselves in the global, both local and global here being experiences of social life. In Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, if that signifies the universality of humanity, then universities historically have been the places where answers for universal questions are sought. In universities, consciously or unconsciously, the academic community has been in pursuit of the truth at the micro and the macro level. Hence, when there is a rising global consciousness, as we are witnessing, universities gain a renewed significance for being the potential sites for the rediscovery of human identity lost in a forgetfulness forged by many divides. There are many interesting questions surrounding such imaginations. Is the idea of global citizenship an abstract, a means to persuade people to turn dialectic? Is global citizenship an underlying sentiment of the people that will improve the human being who's entangled in the systems of divides? Is global citizenship, if not everything, a higher value which makes people to mutually respect as against being tolerant, to accept pluralism as against the pride of particularism, to become inclusive in the perpetual battle of belonging against exclusionism of all forms? What is the role of universities from what they ought to be to what they have become in imparting values of global citizenship? What would be the form and substance of knowledge if global citizenship becomes a subject matter or a value for that matter in the revered halls of universities? In the light of the above, I invite all the panelists to initially reflect on the broader themes before we go into specific questions. So here I request each one of the speakers to reflect on for 5 minutes on the broader theme of the conference, after which I would submit a set of questions to them for them to reflect upon. May I now, first of all, call upon Professor Dr. Kim Brooks to give her reflections. Over to you, Professor Brooks.
Okay, thanks. So I'm really excited to get a chance to be part of this panel, and mostly I'm excited just to hear the great ideas from other people that I can then steal for our institution, which is one of my favorite things to do. So I thought I'd start just by thinking a bit about the question of why global citizenship matters. And again, the panel kind of assumes that this is true, and I think we could dive in on that assumption. But as a starting place, and since you sort of made me go first so that everybody else, will say the smarter things to follow. I thought I'd sort of reflect on 7 things that I think really make a big difference, at least in terms of my own thinking about why it makes sense to focus on global citizenship in the context of universities now. The first, and it's like maybe the most abstract for me, is around the cultivation of a nomadic mind. And again, there's lots we've done as universities to kind of step away from that what seems a little bit ethereal maybe, and to step more into the kind of practical applications of things and our community partnerships and all of that kind of important stuff. But the nomadic mind is like the gift, I think, that is so fundamental to what we do in our institutions. And so for me, that's a big one. The second for me is around kind of balancing what can become insular thinking, right? And so some people are probably not prey to this, but I certainly am. I get exposed to a certain set of activities or practices, behaviors, and then I think those are kind of common, and then I move into the space where I think those are in fact right, and then I reify the sort of behaviors in others. And so having that kind of broader exposure to different practices and behaviors and ways of being makes me kind of question a little bit more whether I've landed on the right answer, opens me up to different possibilities and different ways of doing things, which is kind of connected to my third one, which is I think it compels humility. And that is really challenging, I think, in an institution that really celebrates expertise and can celebrate kind of deep knowledge in a kind of narrow field. To help people cultivate the humility that might go along with that, I think, is a challenge. And so global citizenship, I think, helps us with that. To get a little bit more into some of the things that we talk about more actively in universities these days, I think it's connected to civic engagement. And so it helps us think about the different populations with whom we connect, and broadens out our understanding about who those populations are. And I hope as a result of that, to get to the kind of fifth point here, it cultivates a kind of self-awareness that I think is important. Maybe that's also connected in some ways to the humility, but sort of broader. It inspires political and social engagement, hopefully, and can serve, I think, as a bit of a salve to isolation and loneliness. And you know, if I would have said that 4 or 5 years ago, which I probably would have, we've got a colleague here, I think, from the UK, you know, when the UK was doing all kinds of things around politically, how we think about loneliness and the challenges of loneliness, you know, that's been exacerbated by the last 3 years for many of us, different places. And so building out our sense of community and our sense of belonging and our sense of connectedness strikes me as really important. And then the last for me is, you know, I'm optimistic that it connects the kind of orientation to the world with human action in the kinds of things that we care about, you know, get captured sometimes succinctly by the UN Sustainable Development Goals, but things like supporting peace building, supporting environmental action, and so on, because we have a richer sense of our connectedness to the world and the consequence of human behaviors in that world. You know, hopefully it kind of leaves us in a place where we're aspiring to make that world a better place to be, and lining up our kind of actions with a sort of a kind of global view about what those might look like. So there's, at least from my vantage point, a few starting reflections. Thanks.
Thank you, Professor Brooks. I particularly like the 4 ideas here, which I've noted down. The nomadic mind, that means the world all on a sudden becomes a marvel for the subject, enmeshed in the local. Too localized. Now, definitely the world has suddenly become a marvel, which the subject would like to embrace. And second one, humility. Indeed, the global makes the subject a small, something small in the larger scheme of things. That's exactly when the global looms large in the imagination of the global subject. And third one, absolutely self-awareness. The local subject all on a sudden in a vertigo is searching all around for an identity, which ultimately leads to the global subject realizing oneself. And finally, definitely a very valid point you made, that this prompts the global subject to stand for the global causes without worth addressing, which probably the subject might otherwise ignore in the comfort of the local. So definitely you touched that great point on the value orientation. That's absolutely a pleasure to hear. And now invite Professor Grosman for his reflections.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm delighted to be part of this panel. It's really an honor. I was moved by the concept Professor Brooks introduced, humility, because after all, as universities, we tend to empower students, and therefore, maybe inadvertently, we tend to produce dynamics that are antithetical to humility in many different ways. We form specialists. And when one becomes confident in a specific area, one tends to believe that that area is the most important one, and to dismiss all others. And of course, that applies to connections with the global world as well as to connections within disciplines. And in that sense, I think that it may be useful as a university to think about this in an indirect manner. A virtue such as humility is difficult to teach, as all virtues are, but can be instilled in an indirect manner. And I was thinking that through an interdisciplinary approach, you begin to provide the students with that open view, that broad view, that tends to promote looking at other cultures with a kinder eye, with a more open mind. Not teaching that your discipline is the master, is the master of all disciplines, that it's the, you know, we are all familiar with the imperialistic approach that attaches a specialist. He starts to see the world through very specific eyes. I think that by teaching how other disciplines can understand the world, you start to instill that seed that ends up building some sort of humility that again can apply to many different dimensions, to the global one as well as the disciplinary one. So that's one thought connected to humility, which I think is a key concept here. And the other is, I come from Argentina. My university is in Argentina, and Argentina is not a very global country nowadays. It's a closed-in economy, rather closed-in, although traditionally, I mean, historically, it has not been so. In recent years, it's become rather closed-in, and hopefully that will change in the near future, because nowadays we are all aware, as a result of the economic crisis the country is immersed in, that this is not the way, this is not the road to progress. And once we start walking down that road more vigorously, I think that sooner or later we will find a certain trade-off that is typical of a global approach, and that is a trade-off between abiding by international standards, trying to be internationally, globally competitive on the one hand, and being local relevant on the other. I think that for us as academics, it is very difficult to negotiate that trade-off. And it may end up leading to some sort of a counterproductive dynamic, ones that tends to equate the global with the locally irrelevant. And I think it's our challenge to move around, to find a way out of that trade-off. But maybe I can stop here and we can follow up later. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Grosman. I mean, you definitely, ensured that there's a continuity in the conversation. You spoke about, you also emphasized the need for humility. I believe that there has been a loss of identity due to this, what you say, the interpellation of the global in the local imagination, and people started to develop some kind of an anger in themselves. So against this anger, humility is definitely going to be the biggest virtue. Second, absolutely loved your point on disciplinary egalitarianism. Unfortunately, today problems don't come tailor-made for disciplines to handle. So indeed, we need a multidisciplinary fancy, if not an interdisciplinary expertise to handle the problems. And lastly, yes, you touched the point about the integration of the local to the global. And I believe that here we need to prepare the local, first of all, to get integrated to the global, because local identities are deeply emplaced within culture, within families, which absolutely needs preparation. I believe that's going to be an art for the local to get integrated to the global. Thank you very much for your reflections. May I now invite Professor Kelley for her reflections.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say it's an honor to be among everyone here. I am among the leaders of various universities, and I am a lowly associate director in global programs at Temple University in Philadelphia. So just thank you for the time. I guess I want to speak, I like that we keep touching upon humility. I think that's so important. You're getting outside of your own head. You're realizing it's not just about you, it's about others. I think that a big part of being a global citizen is just asking the question, how can I serve? And whether that is in the local setting, in your own community, at the national level, at the global level, all parts of that are really important. I think if we wait until we get to higher education, I'm just thinking of like education levels for students, and they're only introduced to being a global citizen when they get to college, when they get to university, I think it's too late. I think that there is an intervention where you can obviously have a transformative experience and expose someone to, looking at the world in a much larger picture, changing their ontology completely. But I think it needs to start much, much younger. So ideally, I think higher education would be more supplemental. And some of the ways, and again, this is like a thought experiment what we're having today. So I don't know the answers, but just touching on some of the points that others have already spoken about, certainly in higher education, when we talk about global citizenship, just exposure to global issues, or maybe even a deeper dive and more nuanced understanding of geopolitics, labor markets, social justice, social movements, really helping to open people up to that when they're at the university or, in graduate school, a better sense of empathy and compassion. I know that one of the things, so I work in an international office, and I love talking to students that come in and out, both leaving Temple and coming in. They learn more from other students, I think, than they do in the classroom. Certainly not from me. They're hearing about what the experiences are like for students, how they celebrate major holidays, what's important to them, what they're just experiencing on a daily level. So I think universities offer that space to make those connections, the person-to-person connections. Global citizenship is such a big idea, but at the end of the day, it's two people, right? Making that lasting connection and seeing how they can benefit or how to contribute to benefits in each other's lives. So I think that empathy and compassion. I think global citizenship is at a base level awareness, and then the connection. And then I think you need to take action. And that starts with understanding that we all have responsibilities in our lives and we've all made mistakes, and understanding what you can do to make that right, how you can teach others, and how you can just be helping to make the world a better place. That comes from listening. I know in academia, it's always, and even in this moment, I feel like I have to say something really smart and pontificate, right? You have to listen. You have to take a breath, you have to listen, and you have to give even a space just to let that other person share what's going on in their mind. And that's the only way you're going to know how to make a difference. Right? If I just go in and think, oh, I know how to do this, that's talk about the opposite of humility, right? So I think that responsibility and taking action and creating that space to listen about what that action might be. Collaboration and cooperation. So now that we have technology, now that we have we're all in different parts of the world right now, every one of us, and all the viewers, everybody that's going to be asking us these great questions soon. We're all over the world right now, which is really exciting. Higher ed provides this space for collaboration, for cooperating, for thinking about an issue and making an effort that is coordinated, right? So it's not just like throwing a bunch of ideas, or as I like to say, spaghetti against the wall, but making action steps that can really create a lasting change. And lifelong learning. I'll just end with that. I think that no matter how old you are, whether you're 3 years old like my son, who probably knows more about the world than I do, or you're 150, I think we all need to continue to be lifelong learners, get back to that concept of humility. There's always something more to learn. There's always another question to ask. So thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kelley. We still continue our conversations on higher education, more value-oriented. Thanks to all of you for emphasizing on the point of humility. And one of you mentioned also that, well, humility is not just given. You have to cultivate humility. And humility, of course, humility signifies respect, which is one of the values today we are all looking forward to. You also emphasized that universities should be spaces to know the other, because knowing the other is actually, nothing but fostering respect. I also, like your idea that probably we need to listen to stories of people, and also people should be encouraged to narrate their stories. And let's all develop that wonderful art of listening. And this might ultimately lead to, I've used this expression, I do not know how appropriate it is that we should have inter-ontologies today, which ultimately might lead to people respecting each other. I believe that storytelling is also an excellent means of catharsis, but then that will have a meaning when you have good listeners. So yes, I completely accept your point and definitely incorporate that in my notes, that certainly, we need to be good listeners. That's probably one of the good starting point in developing respect and of course in being humble. So may I now move upon to our next distinguished speaker, which is Professor Olonisakin. Professor, over to you.
Thank you so very much. And thank you to colleagues who have already given us an excellent leeway into this important conversation. And I want to make maybe 3 broad points additional to what we have already heard, because I strongly really agree with the points that have been made, and humility keeps cutting across all of this. But I'll start with the question of values. The first one is that when I think of global citizenship, and if I think of what we at King's College London, by the way, I'm Vice President responsible for international engagement and service at King's College London, I realize that my ID doesn't really show that. So when we talk about global citizenship, for me, it's about the values that ensure that people and institutions are relevant to society at home and abroad. Right, so the question of local and global is very much at the heart of this, and that as far as our students are concerned, that we're preparing the next generation to be able to effectively respond to the challenges of their times. That for me, wherever that next generation is located, wherever our students' body, comes from, eventually, this is what it's about. But therefore, what are those values? For us, we've interpreted over the last 5 years what those values are and what they must be as an institution that is talking about its strategic vision as making the world a better place. And I think Sam made that point about that sort of vision. So those values for us are twofold. It's twofold: global problem solving, having a mindset to solve global problems. And the second is cultural competency. And cultural competency, elaborating on it, and I think we've already heard it from one of our participants, the ability to see the world through the eyes of another. And that itself says a lot for thinking about global citizenship. And I want to close that point in particular by therefore reflecting on the idea of what is global, so that we don't just take it for granted. I want to add to what's been said, that when we think about global in terms of a problem we're trying to solve, we have to look at the ramifications. Either the impact of something or its ramifications are such that they occur evenly across the globe, which is what the environmental or climate change represents for us. Regardless of where you are, you invariably understand what climate change is doing to our world. And that makes this a truly global problem. You feel it in a village, you feel it in a city, you feel it wherever you are. Or we're talking about an experience that is common across different countries and regions. So take the SDGs and take poverty as an example. I don't know of any country where you do not have communities who experience poverty. I'm sitting in London at the moment, and you see that on our streets in terms of homelessness and all sorts of manifestations of it. So it's important to understand that there's almost no one that becomes untouched by the idea of something that is global, that is globalized, that is a global issue. And my last set of points is, what does this mean anyway for us as universities, for higher education institutions? And again, coming from a King's College London perspective, because we've been thinking about this for some time, I think for us in the last 3 years is the translation into curriculum through through subjects like cultural competency, a unit where students will experience this across the board, in their students' journey, but also where staff who teach and research will experience that, because there's no point saying it's about our students. And the elements we build into this then become things like positionality, recognizing one's privileges, the question of power and power hierarchies, and when actually you might be doing things to people. All right, people having things being done to them because our consciousness, our sense of awareness, there's no awakening in that way. Interdisciplinarity, which has been mentioned, and I fully, agree with that. Reflexivity, and therefore, to close. Ultimately, it's about service to society at home and abroad. Ultimately, it's about us as universities, regardless of what our strategic thinking is, that we understand that we have a social contract to our internal communities, our students, staff, and so on, and alumni, but also with the communities around us at home and abroad. And our contract with them is to make them successful people, to be able to solve the problems of their times. And this has to mean something regardless of what part of the world we operate in. And I thank you for putting together a program like this on questions of global citizenship, because many people simply think it's a buzzword, or these are buzzwords, and they're not. They have deep, global citizenship has deep meaning. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Olonisakin. You touched on another value, courage. That's probably something which we need in this world of crisis. And of course, we have seen how courageous humanity can become when we were collectively combating the pandemic. The extraordinary resilience which humanity has shown against the pandemic definitely shows that, of course, courage. Second one is you touched upon the quality of willing and acting, the willingness on the part of the humanity, which ultimately translates into action. The ideal position also, you mentioned that it's not about me and the problem, but I am within the problem. That should be the way to approach all kinds of global problems. And the third one, I completely agree with you on this point that the global has a temporal understanding. Global is certainly not not a material geography, but global is probably the kind of an ugly reality that manifested before us, which needs careful attention and nursing on our part. And you used a word which is quite popular among the material geographers, positionality, that in this fallen world, whereby the time has annihilated the space, you need to reclaim your positionality. But reclaiming the positionality is also reclaiming your situationality in a temporality, which has absolutely become plural and made us absolutely alien to the times within which we live. So thank you very much, Professor Olonisakin. So now may I move upon to the next speaker, which is Professor Mandigo. Over to you, Professor Mandigo.
Great, and thanks so much. And I just am reflecting on what it means to be a global citizen, and this is an example, I think, of being a global citizen. Being able to interact and discuss critical issues with colleagues around the world, being engaged in a conference that brings people again from around the world to talk about issues that are really important to all of us on a personal level and a professional level, and that are meaningful in our society. So thank you for that, for demonstrating the importance of being a global citizen by the sheer presence of this, and to my colleagues as well for sharing your thoughts as well. It's just so amazing, and I'm so honored. I did want to start by acknowledging that the beautiful land that you see behind me is the traditional territory of the Stalo people, who are the indigenous people of this land, who have been stewards of the land here since time immemorial. And we and many of my colleagues across the university are absolutely committed to truth and reconciliation with our indigenous people on the lands that we reside on as well. And I think when I was reflecting upon this session as well, I wanted to reflect on my own personal journey as a global citizen and what it meant. And I've been just so had the honor and privilege of being part of post-secondary education for the past 30 plus years, and being able to learn and work and beside colleagues around the world, and so I thought I would just share what it means to me as a global citizen on both a personal and a professional level. And being situated in a country like Canada, which is multicultural to begin with, our campuses reflect that back on on the importance of global citizenship and welcoming the world to our campuses. Prior to the pandemic, Canadian institutions welcomed over 650,000 students, international students, to our campuses. And so, that value of welcoming the world is a big part of not only Canadian society, but also of our institutions across the country as well. And, so it shouldn't be a surprise that, in higher education in Canada, over 83% of Canadian universities identify global citizenship as a top priority. And we see that in a number of different ways, in strategic plans, commitments in terms of the type of policies that we have on our campuses to be inclusive, to be, commitments to things like equity, diversity, inclusion, are critical parts of how we instill a culture on our campuses to ensure that we're able to welcome the world, but also we're reflection back in terms of how we see the world as well. And so I thought I would just share, a couple of reflections on, my career as an academic and how I've sort of learned along the way about what global citizen is, and I'll then maybe just share some thoughts around from an administrative perspective, what that means as well. And I think, from being an academic and having just tremendous opportunities to work with colleagues around the world in different parts and in a number of different spaces on this planet, I think the importance that the opportunities that we have in higher education is that knowledge doesn't have any boundaries, doesn't have any borders. It's not bound by the passport that you carry that links you to your citizenship in a particular country, but rather knowledge in and of itself is a global concept, and it shouldn't just be housed and bound within countries' borders. And we clearly saw that in the pandemic. If we had just kept knowledge within our own borders, we would still be in the midst of a global pandemic. And so I think that's a good example of how, when the global community works together around tackling different issues through science and research, that makes everyone, that makes the world just a better place and a safer place and a healthier place as well. And so I think, from an academic perspective, global citizenship creates an opportunity to learn together through research and through collaboration, and that knowledge should in essence benefit all of humanity. It shouldn't just be for those privileged individuals who are part of the post-secondary education system, but it should benefit all of our communities and all of society. And then I think, I reflect on my role as a university administrator, and I think it's really important that on our campuses that we create space to support global citizenship on our campuses. And this means, creating space within the classroom, on our campuses, in our policies, to ensure that this is reflected back. Our commitment to global citizenship, is expressed in deep and rich ways. And also, I think, the idea that we facilitate inclusive and welcoming places for individuals, no matter what their passports might say. And so, we want to reflect and celebrate different cultures, different societies on our campuses too. But at the end of the day, we want to reflect the importance of being of all of humanity and being global citizens and working together and tackling issues together. And so creating that space on our campuses that is free of racism, that is rich in recognizing and celebrating cultures and ideas from around the world is also absolutely critical. But that just doesn't mean it just shows up. We have to be diligent to create those spaces and ensure that people feel safe in expressing their ideas on our campuses. And then also creating those spaces to discuss and debate and enhance knowledge about issues that impact each other globally. And I think we've already heard this already. What we do locally has an impact globally and makes connections around the world. So I think, combined, just in closing, as a global, and we think about being a global citizen, there's, I think post-secondary education has an opportunity to point out that there's so much more that we have in common than what's different about us, and that we need to collectively work together to share knowledge that's created on our campuses to create a more equitable and fair world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mandigo. I believe you made a case for the local. I mean, of course, you conveyed the larger understanding that local certainly matters, because ultimately our identities are deeply emplaced in the local. So we cannot afford to forget the local. And also, I believe you made a point that global is nothing but an integration of the many locals. It's not really like a scary macrocosm to which we surrender all the identities, all the experiences. So certainly the local matters, and it's actually that the global is a holism of the many parts, the locals, that actually makes this whole process connect. Or establishing, it's all about establishing, or it became all about establishing connection. So thank you very much to all of you. We have successfully completed the first round. I have no doubt you're all fantastic administrators. You have managed the time very well. So now let me move on to the second part of this panel. So in order to save time, I have 5 questions with me, which I would prefer to read rather than, go around speaking on that. So I'll submit these 5 questions. You may choose to, these questions have some element of particularism to them. That I've tried to focus on particular areas that are relevant for the global citizenship. You may choose to answer any one question, or you may, you may prefer to respond to all the questions together. So these are my questions. Number 1, the idea of global citizen itself is antithetical to the idea of citizenship we are accustomed to. Elementary education all over the world has instilled the sense of national citizenship and certain values associated with it in students. How do we then reorient them about the need to become global citizens? Or is it not the case that global citizenship is not that special sense of belonging to a given state, but it's only the ability to think globally? If that's the case, how does thinking globally, what does thinking globally entail? Second question, once there is a sense of global citizenship in people, whatsoever that means, how does it enable them to participate in global production, especially in connecting, collaborating, and in sharing? Question number 3, in responding to global problems like destruction of environment, climate change, terrorism, global health issues, for example, the COVID-19 pandemic, and violation of human rights, we need a collective will and a collective effort. Is not the parochialism of localism, apologies if parochialism of localism is a bad word, is that not a constraint to the rise of a global consciousness, which can cause collective willing and acting by the global community? How should higher educational institutions approach these problems and tap on the potential of global citizenship? Question number 4, something which we all like to address. We live in an age of technology. Technology is the key to many of the global problems. For example, we saw the merger of infotech and biotech, if I may borrow the word from Yuval Noah Harari, explain the global community to collectively address the disruption caused by the pandemic and in curbing the pandemic itself. How can higher educational institutions integrate technology into the idea of being global, the idea of being together outside of this classical understanding of states? And my last question, as much as the idea of creating global citizens is interesting, it's equally important that global citizenship has inclusiveness. That is, to guarantee that everyone feels being global citizens. If not, global citizenship can pose the risk of exacerbating the existing divides. Global citizenship, if that has to achieve the desired and constructive outcomes, should also become a new value orientation of humanity, of its oneness. How can higher educational institutions guarantee inclusion in global citizenship and global production thereof? So we'll go in the same order in which we conducted the previous session. Let me invite Professor Brooks to speak. Professor Brooks, of course, I'm definitely not giving you a time limit. I've posted 5 questions before you, but we should give 15 minutes to our audience. So we'll try to wind up in another 22 minutes for all of you.
I'll try to be succinct. So I loved listening to what the other panelists said, and I've already made some follow-up notes for myself about things I want to think about in the context of my own institution. So, I mean, and let me riff a little bit on the first question maybe, and take it a bit from some of the comments Sam made about, if they're first thinking about this, it doesn't occur until students arrive at university. It's pretty late to get started. And so I think that means, we really need to think about how to infuse students' experience at the university with a kind of global citizenship and global mindset. And I think that, I'm actually probably more passionate about that when the students who are coming to our institution come from smaller places not far from our university and may never even leave the province or region where we live. Like that coming to university is the invitation and the opportunity to sort of embrace that global mindset. And sometimes we focus on those formal markers of international experience, and that, there's some cautions, I think, in the notes we received kind of in advance in framing this panel about not conflating that kind of international experience with global citizenship and a kind of global mindset, and think, maybe do a little less thinking about how it infuses what it is that we do at the university. And so James said some things I thought about, the reflections on the space in which people find themselves, the visual appearance where we find ourselves, that kind of broader context that infuses the experience. And so for my part, I think of, to really take this on means having it thread through all of the things that we're doing in the institution, from the case studies we choose in classes to the human interactions people have. And again, Sam flagged that when she was talking about students with students, but it's also faculty with different kinds of engagements that they have in research partnerships, and then the student to faculty relationships and so on. The reading lists that people have and the sort of global representativeness, I think, of some of those lists, the kind of efforts we make around cultural competence, the partnerships that we have with community groups and how those community groups reflect global communities and their engagement with the university. And then, using that kind of mindset as a way of connecting, the ideas that students get from readings, for example, and from interactions they have to real people's experience, to sort of displace the idea that there are sort of us and then them somewhere else, and actually really see it as there's just us. And so I think those things, that's what gets me really excited when I think about that first question. How do we really think about what it looks like? The first question, you sort of focused it a bit on elementary education, but I was sort of taking Sam's prompt about what if we imagined there wasn't something at that stage, and tried to think about how we would intersect meaningfully at the kinds of institutions where we work. So those are the kinds of things that I had a running list, and then I started adding to it as people were making comments. And so I appreciate the conversation so far.
Thank you, Professor Brooks. I feel that maybe we could tell the students to feel it. They have, after all, people who belong to locals who are now all on a sudden trying to get to understand their local, and the universities are actually trying to give them this understanding that you have a global imagination looming large before you. So maybe that their own transition from the global to the local, and that could probably a good way to connect to them. So I now, may I now invite the next speaker, Professor Grosman.
Thank you very much. I would like to address questions 1 and 2 together, because I actually think that they come hand in hand. And I would even try to reverse the logic and to suggest that the answer to question 2 entails the answer to question 1. And let me start with a fable. Maybe you're familiar with it. I believe it might be an internationally known fable. The fable of the fox and the grapes. Do you know it? So there's a fox that attempts to reach grapes, but cannot do it. They are too high for it. So after a number of attempts, the fox ends up saying, well, I don't care. Actually, I don't even like grapes. Okay. So I think that the problem for global thinking may be that people are afraid not to be globally competitive, as question 2 entails. That people react in a, as you say in question 1, they try to think of the national citizenship and the global citizenship as antithetical concepts, because many times they're afraid of not being able to be a competitive and able global citizen. And I think that that's, of course, a defensive reaction. And I think that nationalistic populism that is big around the world today, and probably it's the biggest enemy for global thinking, takes advantage of this fear, cultivates this fear. And therefore, I think that the way to combat this anti-global approach is to foster the kind of abilities that make people globally competitive. I think that must be upfront in terms of higher education, to instill in our students the idea that they need and that they can be globally competitive. This must be a target for them. I know that in countries such as India, maybe that this is common sense. Of course, maybe not in the United States, in Canada, in the United Kingdom, that's common sense too, because they're more international. These are very international and internationalized countries, but that's not true around the world. I mean, and as I said, nationalistic thinking is rampant. And we shouldn't take that idea for granted. The idea that you should try to be globally competitive, that you should always be aware of the need to provide goods, services that are globally relevant. And I think that for universities, that must be a central idea. And I think that in that sense, once your students become confident in their abilities to be global citizens, question one answers itself naturally. It's no longer a problem. Okay, that's a thought I had in mind when I read the two together. I hope it helps some reflection. Thank you.
No, you actually brought us to a reality at some point, which we witnessed, that the global is sour as much as the proverbial grapes were. That kind of an argument definitely existed during the earlier days when the global was, well, the global came literally as a culture shock to the people. But I believe that now slowly people have started to set in. And also, all problems are not global problems, but definitely global problems need a global way of addressing it. Local problems need a local way of addressing it. I remember this theory popularized by Professor John Jackson, the horizontal allocation of power, that today we need not see that the global taking away the power of the states. Rather, the global problems shall be allocated to the global agencies to address, whereas national problems shall be addressed nationally and local problems shall be addressed locally. So I think you touched upon that point. That's absolutely interesting. Let me now move on to Professor Kelley.
Hi, thank you again. And again, I know Dr. Brooks mentioned, I'm taking notes as everybody's speaking, because it's kind of, it's just kind of expanding possibilities, I think, for all of our institutions and the work that we do. So again, it's an honor to be here. I'm going to talk, I guess, briefly about technology. I think of like how fast technology has been moving, and certainly Generation Z, who's probably attending this session as the audience, is intimately aware of technology and uses it. Growing up, I didn't have my first mobile phone until I was in my early 20s. We didn't have the internet until I was a sophomore in high school. So the possibilities for using technology are so effective right now. I know that there's a lot of negative things that can happen too. We can talk about that in another session, but talking about the possibilities that it creates for all of us and creates for students, not everybody has money to study abroad, right? I didn't. I worked at a restaurant and saved money in college and then lived abroad afterwards with the money that I made because my family didn't have enough money to send me anywhere. And I know that that's the experience of a lot of students. And so certainly that transformative experience of being able to be somewhere and to, experience that like in the moment, your reality is a new country, a new language, new foods, new, et cetera. Not everybody has that access. So just acknowledging that. I think the buzzword now, I just came back from a conference that maybe many of you were at too, API in Bangkok. Everybody's talking about COIL, Collaborative Online International Learning. And this is something at Temple that we haven't done uniformly, but we're trying to implement it with different partners and with different, universities that we collaborate with to give access to students that might not have a chance to study abroad. And I'm not just talking about students, from outside the US, I'm talking about students at Temple too, right? We're a public university. So not a lot of students have great means. And so with COIL opportunities, we've done virtual exchanges. We've set up guest lectures so that professors and even like graduate students, PhD students from partner universities are able to provide a lecture to Temple students and vice versa. And I'm sure everyone's kind of doing that as well. But just to touch on that, that's something that I definitely didn't have growing up. My learning came from watching TV or reading books I could get my hands on, having that direct experience of seeing all of you like I am now and being able to ask you questions and hear about your experiences or whatever the discipline is that the class could be about or the project. That's something that I still think is pretty cool, pretty exciting. And it creates that leveling field. It creates that access for everybody, regardless of your means. So COIL, I think, is great. I think just having opportunities like this to interact with all of you and, to hear questions from the audience, that's something, again, we didn't have Zoom growing up. So this is exciting, still is. Let's see, technology, even just to be able to say, you know what, I don't really know about the concept of global citizenship. Let me plug it in and do my research. We have that at our fingertips. I think that is something that is overlooked a lot of times. Just you can find out about anything using technology very quickly. Of course, it is not as multifaceted as doing it yourself and being in person, but it gives you a little bit of an understanding. And then certainly even just social media. And I have thoughts on social media, but being able to make connections with people across the world and keep up on their everyday experiences and see their lives, I think that it provides more of a what your daily experience is like and wherever you're living, or even if you're having that study abroad experience and you can show family and friends back home, it kind of helps to awaken and have other people see what those trivial moments are like. Because that's what a lot of life is. It's just those small little moments, not always the big successes. So I think technology presents a lot of opportunity. Again, a whole other conversation could be, so we could really unpack it and talk about some of the more critical aspects of technology, but I think it helps to, I'll just conclude, it levels that playing field and creates access for everyone to have maybe not the 100% transformative experience of living in a new place, but certainly a real opportunity to take that first step or second step to help open your mindset and help you to see a different part of the world and different and new ways of thinking.
Thank you, Professor Kelley. Indeed, technology gave us a new planet, the meta-geography, where we do active socialization these days as against the limited socialization in the material geography. But when you were speaking, I was thinking that technology also initially instills a fear. I mean, that's the first response to technology, to resist, because we are scared that technology might lead us to the biggest global problem, irrelevance of human beings. But of course, you all know Harari, I remember he said that, well, irrelevance is going to be the biggest problem tomorrow. But later on, he came back and said that had there been no merger of infotech and biotech, we would not have been able to combat the pandemic. But of course, in the way the fear abated, all the skepticism towards technology to abated, which literally helped us to connect and which helped us be together. Now I'll move upon to Professor Olonisakin. Over to you.
Thank you. Let me just first say how exciting it's been to listen to everyone and to see the meeting of minds, and also to learn and see different perspectives, to learn from what has been said. I want to combine questions 1 and 5. first of all to say that, okay, so I was saying that where we're located as an institution and the kind of students that walk through our doors will inform the ways in which we approach global citizenship, both in terms of education and knowledge production. So I certainly think that it's important that we all ask ourselves, again, back to positionality. So that question will always, be something that we need to address all the time. Why this has to do with inclusiveness for me is that at the end of the day, the population, the kinds of students, how we create decent human beings, but global, globally attuned human beings out of our students is critically important. At King's, we have about 33,000 students. 40% of them are from about 150 countries. And so when we have students situated locally in a very diverse United Kingdom, different races, different classes, and so on, and we then bring people from 150 countries, it's absolutely essential that global citizenship is at the core of what we do. And this is where the cultural competency comes in. That is not about trying to understand, look at other cultures. It's about the personal transformation that students experience in order to in turn transform, their communities, however they define those communities. I want to leave it at that, because Kim's question about inclusiveness, when people come from very, very local and they have not experienced that before, is something that can exclude if we have all these international students around us and do not think about the experience. And so what we do with those students and how they interact and the kinds of subjects, the kinds of thinking we instill internally is at the core of everything, not just an international experience abroad. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Olonisakin. I think we cannot let the global just to remain something meta. The problem is that if the global is too disjuncted from the local, we might ultimately be creating a new universal, and universals have always been means of oppression. I mean, I'm very happy that while we are making strong case for embracing the global, we are also making a strong case for retaining the local. Professor Mandigo, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. This has been amazing, and my thanks to my colleagues for being inspiring today as well. I wanted to pick up on something that Sam has said around this idea of being a thought experiment. And if you look at, I'm going to address questions number 3 and number 5, and just the topics around global problems like destruction of environment and climate change and terrorism, global health issues, the pandemic. These are wicked problems that we're all facing together as a society. And what happens in as we're really talking about this idea of being locally. It's what happens in one place impacts the world around us. And if I were to think about what would happen if we created universities today, what would they look like? Would they be rooted in the disciplines that we have? Clearly it's important to have disciplinary knowledge, and I'm not arguing against not having disciplinary knowledge as part of our universities. But what if we set up our universities to address, faculties of wicked problems? A faculty of climate change, a faculty of global, of a particular of pandemic response, right? And what would happen is, and then I think the comment earlier around this idea of multidisciplinary approaches, I think is probably where we would end up, because we think about our experiences with the pandemic. It wasn't just a biological issue. It was a social issue. It was an economic issue. It was a social justice issue. And all of these things had to come together in terms of how we responded as a society to tackling the global pandemic. And it was and how that knowledge needed to get disseminated globally around the world. And so I guess I think about how we as universities are set up to tackle some of these wicked problems, and how we might think differently about breaking down some of the structures and the barriers and the silos that we've created over time for good reasons. But now the world is so complex that maybe we need to rethink a little bit about how we put our structures in place so that they're not barriers, but they're enhancers of addressing some of the global issues. I also think about the types of knowledge that we value and don't value on our campuses as well, in tackling some of these issues. And clearly universities were founded on some of the basic scientific principles, scientific method, but having universities have this opportunity around academic freedom to explore issues that go beyond the common norm and the common thinking, to really challenge assumptions and think about new ideas. But how do we create that space so that a number of voices are able to come and tackle issues together? And I think about our Indigenous communities here in Canada, and the connection that they have to the land, and how they've been stewards of the land since time immemorial, and how important that making sure that that's part of our discussion around climate change. How we respect the land, how we use our natural resources. That's been something that our Indigenous community have really been stewards of for much longer than those of us who are settlers on this land. And so ensuring there's spaces and opportunities to infuse and incorporate different forms of knowledge and different forms of ideas. It's not maybe always the scientific voices that get published in top tier journals that are important. They're important. I'm not saying they're not important, but there's also lots of spaces for other ways of knowing and understanding the complexities of these wicked problems that we're trying to tackle on our campuses and in our communities. I think I'll stop there, and just looking forward to continuing the discussion here with my colleagues.
Thank you, Professor Mandigo. Universities indeed are amphitheaters, they are agoras, and everyone there, in students, faculty members, they are voices. I believe that's your understanding of freedom, and which is absolutely quite profound, as this is definitely antithetical to some other understanding we have about the freedom, that freedom is all about creating spaces, right, left, center, far left, far right. If you don't fit into these spaces, you do not represent a voice. But definitely, that the freedom you spoke about is much more inclusive, whereby you will have what one of my colleagues, Professor Shivishwanathan, says, cognitive justice. And in that world of cognitive justice, no voice is irrelevant. So we ended on a beautiful note, and I have a couple of questions from the audience. And interestingly, the first question is directly related to what we spoke about. How can teachers integrate global citizenship education into their existing curriculum? Well, the question is open for all of you. Any one of you may take it.
Can I offer one just very, other people will have more thorough responses, but my encouragement to people is always at a pace that works for you. And so, I think sometimes I go to events like this and I get really excited about what's possible, and then I start to feel overwhelmed by all of the possible options. And I think if you're trying to think, how can I integrate this into the curriculum, for example, thinking about, for next year, what are 3 new readings you could add to what you're doing in your class that would bring more voices to it? Or what are some things visually you could bring into the classroom that would start to embrace a sort of broader global mindset? And if every year each of us added 3 new things to respond to some of the interesting ways we're being asked to change the way we think about things, the world would be very different. And so the main thing I'd say is just don't be deterred by the volume of things you could possibly do. Pick something and do it.
Thank you. Anyone else would like to take this question?
Can I just add very quickly to that? I like the idea of readings, and that's central to everything. We've also been talking about the possibility of teaching the history of subjects because in teaching the history of a subject, it says a lot to students about the, about the origins of so many things. But at King's, I talked about cultural competency earlier, but this is something that across the whole college serves as a tool of induction, a module to that serves as student induction and staff induction as well. So everyone gets to do it as a point of entry, at the point of entry into the university. This is very recent. We've only had about 2,000 students enrolled on it. Finally, there's also some co-curricular as well as curricular module that we call Global Leadership. One is Principal's Global Leadership Awards, and it's mixing students across all faculties and also using, reading lists like Kim was saying, to really broaden the mindset and help them thinking about problem solving differently. I think every institution would have to choose its own mechanism, but I think it's both teaching in terms of the curriculum content, but pedagogy as well. Thanks.
I think this idea of going back to the history is very fascinating, because you might have noticed that our session has a very interesting catchphrase, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, which definitely has its roots in ancient Indian history. So when global citizenship itself can be traced back to, a historical age, definitely, that it makes a lot of sense to say that students should be, acquainted with reading histories. I got another interesting question, unless no other panelists respond.
I just had one short thing to add to that. And this is just like just hitting on the pedagogy and everything I just mentioned, your reading lists. Who are your authors? Where are they from? Because the voices that you have your students read and how they contribute to the learning content of the classroom is power. So I've had many professors in my younger days. Every author was a white male. No offense to white males, but I mean, there is a certain power dynamic, white male from the United States, I'll even say that. So that positionality is incredibly different from the varied voices in the world. And so I would say, just like further tuning in on that, who are your authors? Where are they from? And then last point, for any piece of literature brought into the classroom, just that critical thinking of where are they getting their sources? What is the intention, that surface level? What are they indirectly saying? And just really trying to pick apart and pull apart all the sources that you're bringing into your classroom, because it makes for some really engaging discussions.
Yeah, and if I could just build on that too, and great point, Sam, around the importance of whose voice matters and whose voice is empowered in our learning environments is so really important. And I think that one of my top academic experiences was teaching a class in Japan with students from, probably in the class there was maybe 30 different nationalities, and it was such an energizing experience for me, where we would tackle a particular issue and you'd get such different perspectives and different ideas, and that's I think where the richness really comes out. And so I think in our classrooms, being able to create space for discussion and for voice and for empowering different voices, empowering different ideas, to have, if you can't have debates and discussions at universities, where can you have them? And so that's often where the new emergent ideas come from, is through that dialogue, through active listening, through respectful conversations and dialogue. And so I would just encourage us, and I think Kim's point around the importance of, bringing in, steps at a time, not feeling overwhelmed. It's okay to, bring in a discussion, have a lecture, maybe add a new topic every year that, you want to get some different ideas about, and creating space within the classroom for your students to be able to discuss and dialogue, but create an environment where they feel safe and free to bring up their ideas and opinions as well, based on the topic. So
that question seems to be attracting a lot of responses. So I'll definitely open the question for the other two distinguished panelists as well. So that's specifically about how could we integrate global citizenship education into existing curriculum?
Oh, the same question. Okay, well, I was thinking that by showing to what extent which is always a large extent, you are not unique. You know, your situation is not unique. You're not so peculiar. You're part of a much more general pattern. And one way of showing that is, as somebody else mentioned, by showing history of institutions or anything else, by showing influences, because the truth is that no national system is pure in any relevant sense. And you become aware of that once you learn history. And I think that's true of many different disciplines. Of course, it applies better to some disciplines than to others, but I think that a general point can be made about it.
Professor Olonisakin, would you like to respond to this question on how to integrate the global citizenship into our curriculum?
Yes, I think this sounds very similar to the last question, because I essentially...
Yeah, she did.
Yes, I thought I was responding also to that by saying that it's how we induct our students and staff, but also how we build history into the curriculum in the first instance. So we may not call something global citizenship, but if we return to the values we spoke about at the start, of global problem solving, cultural competency, understanding power, concepts of power and positionality and so on, and we reflect that in the curriculum. And we also give students experiences that allow them to interact with so many different audiences and identities, and solve and do global problem solving as part of the curriculum. That could be amazing. The sort of stuff that we see students do in teams, in projects, on SDGs these days, will begin to introduce that sense of global citizenship. I think we need to think about the curriculum as something that is not as rigid as we've traditionally done it, that we need to build a lot of innovation into it in order to, broaden, expand the thinking of students as a whole. But I think it could be exciting for each institution to do that.
Thank you. Sorry to make you to repeat the question, but in fact, you did not. I'm sure the questioner would be happy to hear you again. So unfortunately, due to the paucity of the time, we cannot take more questions. I wish I were not a moderator of this panel. I would have definitely, extended this panel. But the interesting thing is, what did we speak? Rather, I would say what not we. What did we not speak here? We spoke about values. You spoke about qualities. We touched upon spatiotemporality, the real, surreal, slip, epistemology, ontology, phenomenology, politics. Well, I mean, of course, we have at least this panel has very successfully demonstrated that it is worth talking about global citizenship. It's not yet another fantasy. It's not something that is left to metaphysics, but it's a reality which we experience, something which is part of our own consciousness, our own routine existence. So I take this opportunity to thank you, all of you. It has been absolute honor for me to listen to all of you and to moderate this panel. I learned a lot from all of you, and I hope I've also been able to thread all these things, all these brilliant views together. Thank you very much, and have a nice day to all the participants, and of course, all those who are connected from this part of the world. Good night.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.